All right, guys. Hopefully, you got some good gratitudes written down and some intentions. It looks like I put Kyle to sleep there looking at his video. So, oh, okay. He's showing me that he wrote down some stuff. All right, cool. Well, hey, I'm excited to get to be with you guys today. And as I was thinking about what I wanted to share today, I feel like I have something that I have run into quite a bit lately. And so what I want to share with you, what I want to talk about today is a principle. And last week when I shared the message with you guys, I talked about the Napoleon Hill and how much of that Napoleon Hill self-confidence formula is about our thoughts and what we are focusing on and those type of things. And so I want to maybe just even somewhat, I guess, build on that just a little bit. And here's the principle that I want to talk about with you guys is our assumptions determine our behaviors. So if you were wanting to take some notes today, that would probably be the first thing that I would recommend that you write down is that our assumptions determine our behaviors. Whatever we assume is what is going to be the way that we then act. And to put that in like the simplest terms that I could, I would probably say if I were to go sit down on this chair that's over here in the room, my assumption is that it's going to hold me up or I wouldn't sit down on it. So our assumptions determine the behaviors. The things that we assume are going to determine the way that we then respond. Well, part of why I have been thinking about that is I just helped, and I'm trying to decide if there's anybody on this call that would know who I'm going to talk about. So I better be careful here. But my sister. So hopefully none of you. I have three of them, so maybe that will keep it vague enough. But I want to share an example with my sister. Now the problem is, if you know that my sister, this is going to narrow it down to exactly which one. But I just helped her buy a new place, and we just closed on it in the last week. Well, in the process of this, so let me give you the background on this. I am the youngest of five. She is the oldest of five. And so as a result of that, her being the oldest, she ended up taking care of me a lot when I was a little kid, and because my dad, and I'll tell this story some other time, but my dad was killed when I was 7 years old, and as a result of that, my mom then raised five kids. So my sister is 10 years older than me. So she was 17 when my dad was killed. I was seven, and there was five total kids. So obviously, my sister ends up helping quite a bit with my mom as I was a young child. Well, as a result of that, I always felt like that my sister was trying to be my mom. And so as a teenage kid or whatever, I always was a little bit annoyed that, she would always treat me that way. Well, we still have a good relationship. I don't want to sound like we don't, but in the process of helping her to buy a property, so she called me up a couple months ago and just said, "Hey, I want to buy a property." And specifically, she wanted to get a house. But as we looked, and as you guys have seen, what ends up happening is we go out and we start looking at properties. She falls in love with the ones that she liked, and unfortunately, she could only qualify for up to 240,000, or at least that's the max she wanted to spend. Well, as you can imagine, we would go out and find properties down in Springville or Spanish Fork area, and we'd find a property that was listed around 240 or between 230 and 240. And just as you would guess, when what happens is we would go make offers, and there would be multiple offers that would end up driving the price up higher than she could go. So we were consistently getting outbid. Well, after making a number of offers on properties and getting outbid, we went and looked at one that we thought we finally were going to be able to get. Well, it turns out we still end up getting outbid on this one. And the next day, my sister sees a condo that's in the same complex, but different building, but same complex. And she says, "Let's just make an offer on it because it's the same floor plan we already saw. I know I was fine with it. Let's just make the offer." So we make the offer on it, which tons of little side notes of stories that I could tell from this. They were only offering 1% on the BAC too, which was annoying, but did end up getting the full 3%. So, but that's not the point of the story. So we make the offer on the property. We get the property accepted. Well, not long after that. Now, remember, what we're talking about is how our assumptions determine our behaviors, and then I'm going to get into that and how that applies to you in business planning in just a minute. But in the process of that, we go and look at the property, and we find out when we get the seller disclosures that the property is currently rented, and so there's a tenant in the property. Well, the agent had told me early on that this tenant was on a month to month, and that they were given notice that as soon as they got an offer accepted, she was going to have, that would be her 30-day notice to move out. Well, so that's what was happening. Well, my sister goes to lunch with a friend, or somehow is talking to a friend of hers that says, oh, I bought a place one time, and I didn't realize that after I bought it, that I was subject to the lease that was already in place, and the lease was still 8 months long. And so I had bought this place, and then I had to sit there and wait for 8 months. Well, so my sister calls me immediately and's panicked now. I know there's a tenant in there. I'm worried that what's going to happen is she's not going to move out. She's not going to be willing to leave, and I'm going to have to honor the lease. And I said, calm down. Everything's going to be okay. I was already aware they're on a month-to-month lease. They've got it set up to where the tenant will be able to move and be out of the property before we close. So it's not going to be a problem. Well, as the process went on, my sister just kept calling me and saying, are you sure? Like, I just can't see how she's going to be out. Like, it's hard to find a place to rent right now. So what's she going to do? And I said, well, it doesn't really matter because she's been given the notice and da-da-da. Well, finally, at one point, I said to my sister, look, I have done this for 25 years. I've come across scenarios where people have had the property rented, and also there's sellers in there. Does it happen that occasionally somebody doesn't move out? Yeah. And I told her, it's possible that even if you just bought a property that the seller lived in it, that the seller doesn't move out. That's always a possibility. But why are you assuming? And so here's the point. I asked her, why are you assuming that they're not going to move out? And she said, well, because that's just the way things go for me. Nothing ever seems to go my way. Now, so here's the point. Our assumptions determine our behaviors. See, she assumed something bad is going to happen because that's who I am. But see, that's not the case. It is not necessarily that things are bad going to happen. So here's what I want to show you guys. Now, specifically, here's what I want to talk about is on our business plan. And if you have not filled out your business plan for 2021, it's time to start doing that and to be thinking that way. And I would recommend that you get that done over the next month so that you are ready to go. Now, to some extent, we really probably should have had it done a month ago, because this last quarter, you're really starting your business for next year. So FYI, in case you were not aware, I know most of you are, but if you're not aware, your business for 2021 is being set up right now. You're in the process of starting to get 2021's business going right now. So if you have not done a business plan, you want to do it. Well, as you go through that business plan, one of the very last sections on there has a spot for challenges and solutions, where you should be identifying what are the challenges that you foresee to you accomplishing and getting to what your goals for 2021 are. Now, this may take some time for you to get to that, meaning that, we take time every day to write in a journal. And if you are not taking time to do this, and I'm speaking to myself here because I need to do a better job than I currently do with this. But if you are not using a journal, you have got to start doing it. And part of what is going to create the growth that you want for yourself is going to come as a result of you asking yourselves questions and writing them down in a journal. So you need to implement that if you're not doing it. And if you are, and you're like me, but you're not doing it at the level you should be, then start to do it. So I'm going to commit to you guys that I'm going to start to doing better with that, because I need to do a better job with it. So I'm speaking to myself now just as much as I am to you. But here's the thing. Part of what we need to do is, as we set these goals, we've got to stop and ask ourselves the question, what are the challenges or the struggles that I'm going to come up against to getting to that goal? Now here, if you will tell the truth, remember I've told you guys many, many times, I just believe power comes out of telling the truth. And telling the truth means telling it to yourself up here. Don't lie to yourself. See, unfortunately, what happens is I've spent the last 15 years training agents, and here's what I notice, and specifically with newer agents that have everything in the world going for them to be successful in this business, and they come in and then they fail. And they fail because they won't tell themselves the truth up here. We have to be willing to tell ourselves the truth. And the challenge is when we come up against a barrier. So I'm going to show you what this looks like here of what we're talking about. I'm going to do a point A here and a point B here. And as we go from point A over here to point B, we come up against these obstacles or these barriers. Well, see, what happens is this. We come up against these obstacles or these barriers, and at this obstacle or this barrier. Now, let me explain the difference. An obstacle is something exterior. An obstacle would be, I was going to go door knocking today, but it rained. That's an obstacle. A barrier is something internal. It is a roadblock that you have created in your own mind. It's my sister saying, well, something bad is going to happen to where it's going to be a problem for me to get moved in, which, by the way, we got the tenant out earlier than they said they were going to be, and she was able to get moved in right away. Just so you know, everything worked out fine. But what happens is as we are going from here, point A is what we have, point B is what we want. So as we go from what it is we have to what it is we want, we are going to encounter obstacles and barriers. Just plan on it right now. As you set goals and say, I want to get from here to there, you are going to have obstacles and barriers. It's going to happen. If it didn't, you would already have done it. If there was no obstacle or barrier, you would have already done it. So as you sit down now and you say, okay, I want to take my income from point A, whatever it is that it was, to what it is you want it to be, you've got to ask yourself and tell yourself the truth. What are going to be the obstacles or the barriers to me getting there? And if you'll tell yourself the truth, you can identify what those obstacles and what those barriers are going to be. And then we can come up with a solution. But until you're willing to tell the truth about it, what ends up happening is this. We run up against the barrier, and instead of paying the price, because you could look at these obstacles or barriers as toll booths. Think about a toll booth on a freeway. You're driving along the freeway, you come across a toll booth, you have to pay the price to continue on that road. Well, this same thing happens with this. Obstacles and barriers are just toll booths. They demand payment, they extract a price. You got to be willing to pay the price to get past this obstacle or this barrier. The challenge is here's what I see happen though, is we come up against one of those challenges, those obstacles or those barriers, and instead of telling the truth and saying, it's me that's the issue, I need to just change my relationship to this obstacle or this barrier. Instead of that, what ends up happening is this, is we look outside of ourselves and we want to blame it on somebody else. We want to say that so-and-so didn't help me, or so-and-so set me up to fail, or they did this. If you want to see where this happens in your life, pay attention the next time that you say to somebody, I ran out of time. The next time you say the words, I ran out of time, reflect back on what we're talking about right now and stop and look at it and ask yourself the question, did I really run out of time, or did I just not prepare properly for this event? Did I not leave in time to get there? See, typically what will happen is when we run into these obstacles or barriers, our first response, it's human nature, is to look outside of ourselves and say, it is because of, and then you can fill in the blank. It was because of this person. It was because of the weather. It was because of the traffic. We will blame it on other things rather than taking responsibility. And if you want to get from point A to point B, you got to take responsibility. Responsibility is being the reason or the person behind the cause of an event. It's you saying, it was me. It was my relationship to this obstacle or this barrier. And it wasn't somebody else's fault. I could have done it if I would have done this or that. That's what we have to do. So as we go from what it is we have to what it is we want, we're going to identify and come across obstacles and barriers. Now, are we always going to know every single one of them? No. You're going to have scenarios where you come across an obstacle or a barrier you weren't experiencing. But here's what I would invite you to look at. Because again, I've watched people be successful in other businesses and come into here and not succeed. But I've also watched people come into this business that had everything going against them. They should not have been in the business at all, and yet they make it. Now, why? because they are willing to face these obstacles and barriers. See, what ends up happening also is we will see people that leave our company and go somewhere else, and they will say, well, it's because, and again, they're looking outside of themselves, not taking responsibility. See, the challenge was sometimes of saying, I'm leaving to go to another company because they're going to do da 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 da. The problem is you take you with you. And the issue isn't typically the obstacle that's the exterior, it's usually an interior barrier that's holding us back. And when we are willing to deal with that barrier and say, it isn't the weather that's doing it, it wasn't the clock, it wasn't the traffic, it was my relationship to it, and I just need to change my relationship, that's how we take back our power. See, the problem with obstacles and barriers is we give away our power. We give it to the obstacle, we give it to the barrier. And when you give away your power, there's nothing you can do about it. But if you'll take back the power, and by saying, it wasn't the clock's fault, it wasn't the traffic's fault, it was me and my relationship to it, then you now can take back the power and you can change it. See, what I'm saying is this: as you identify your business plan for 2021 and you start to look at, here's where I want to go in my business, here's where I want to take it to, stop and ask yourself, what are the obstacles and the barriers that are holding me back or that could hold me back from getting to there? What are they that have stopped me in the past? Because it's no different than my sister of saying stuff just doesn't work out for me. If that's a belief you have, guess what? Stuff's not going to work out for you. And if you want to change it, you got to change it to, you know what? Stuff's going to show up, but I'm going to be able to deal with it and I'm going to figure out. Because here's the other thing I will know: every time there is an obstacle or a barrier that shows up, there's a way over, around, or through that barrier. There is always a way over, around, or through it. And sometimes you do have to get with somebody else and say, help me figure it out. I keep running into this wall over and over and over again. And I need somebody to help me figure it out, because sometimes we're so focused on the obstacle or the barrier, we can't see the way around it. But somebody else can look at it with us and say, well, quit running into the wall. There's a door just over here. Go through the door, quit running into the wall. See, sometimes we need somebody else to give us some advice or input of how to get over, around, or through it. But when we get there, just know there is going to be a price you have to pay. Now, that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing, but you're going to have to pay a price to get over, around, or through that obstacle or that barrier. And the question is, are you willing to pay that price? Because here's what I know. Every one of you, I've looked at the list on here, and there was a couple that I wasn't sure about. No, I'm kidding. But every single one of you guys can get, I know most every single person that is on here, and I will tell you, you are much better, stronger, and more capable of accomplishing the things you want to do than you give yourself credit for. Like, I've looked through the list. There are people at other companies I wouldn't say that about, but you guys could do it. You guys have the ability to do it. I know you guys. I know almost every person on here. You're capable of accomplishing it. It's just you saying, okay, what do I need to do? How do I pay the price? Is it making that one extra contact? Is it being willing to say, I'm going to call my SOI even though I'm afraid? I'm afraid they're going to think I'm bugging them, or because we're in Utah, those of you guys that are, that they're going to think I'm trying to sign them up for some multi-level marketing thing. If that's what you're afraid of, so what? Are you willing to pay the price and get through it? Wouldn't you rather know that your friends and family are going to use you or not going to use you, instead of just seeing their for sale sign in their front yard? I know for me, that's what finally got me to get past that barrier. Is I got sick of seeing neighbors' houses go up for sale, and then them saying, here's the truth, guys, we assume they think that we assume they know we would love to help them. But the truth is, they assume you just must do some other type of real estate, or you're just not interested in helping them because you've never talked to them. That's the truth. So be willing to look at this and say, as I go from where it is I have to what my goals are going to be for 2021, what are the obstacles or the barriers that would stop you from getting there? And if you need help, get with a manager, get with me. I'll be happy to help you figure out a way over, around, or through these barriers. But what I promise you is, as you go down this path and they show up, that you have the ability to get by them, you can get over, around, or through them. And if you need help, get somebody else to do it, because the good news is, just like on the freeway, once you pay the toll, you get to continue on the path. You get to keep going. Now, that doesn't mean others won't show up along the way to get there. That is possible. But if you are committed, John talked about commitment this week. When you're committed, you will find a way over, around, or through that barrier to enable you to get to where you want to be. Now, let me just speak to what happens if we don't. If we don't, we end up down here at point C. So if this is point A is what we have, here's what we want. Point C ends up being just some other result. We end up getting some other result that is not what we said we wanted. Now, the challenge with this is, here's the key. Don't beat yourself up if you end up at point C. Don't say, I knew it. See, that's what my sister would have done. If the tenant wouldn't have moved out, my sister would have said, I knew it. That's what always happens to me. See, you lose if you do that. If you end up down here, guess what? Here's the thing. If you do that when you get to point C, when you get to some other result that is not what you wanted, and you say to yourself, I knew it, meaning you give away your power, you are destined to repeat it again. The only way that you're not going to do this over and over and over again is back here. You got to take back your power and say, it is not the wall that's doing it to me. It is me. It's my relationship to it. And if I will change my relationship to it, then I can get over, around, or through it. So here's the question for you guys for today. What do you need to change? What is the obstacle or the barrier? Now, you don't need to share it in the chat box. You're welcome to if you want, but make a note for yourself. What is it that is stopping you from getting where you want to go? What's holding you back? And what do you need to do? And if you'll answer that question, there is power in that. That's why I always say there's power in telling the truth. When we tell the truth, we are able to make a change back here with our relationship to this obstacle or this barrier, and you can get through it. But as long as you blame it on somebody else, it's some other reason of the why you didn't do it. Even if you just say that happens to people like me, you got to let that go and just say, no, I'm creating that to happen to people like me, and I'm not going to let it happen anymore, and I'm going to change the way I think about it. So what are you going to do differently? And here's the last question for you. Again, you don't need to share it in the chat box, but you're welcome to. What would it do for you? How would it change your life? Imagine what things could be like if you were willing to pay the price to get around, over, or through that obstacle or that barrier. What would it do for you? What would it do for your family? How would it help you to accomplish the greater your purpose that we talk about so much? All right. Hopefully you got some good information, some good thoughts on that. If I can help with it, anything on it, let me know. But let's go ahead and wrap it up now with our closing affirmations. Go out and make it an awesome day. I think let's wrap it with what George said yesterday. It doesn't matter who the president is. I guess ultimately that fits into what I'm saying. That's something exterior of who we are. If the person you wanted to win doesn't end up winning, guess what? You can still accomplish your goals, because we still live in America, which last I checked is still probably the best place to be. So, all right, let's